Welcome to AK Podcast, where we explore science and nutrition behind livestock care and management with the best and the brightest in the business. I'm your host, Chris Radke, part of the sales department here at Agri-King, and with me today is the Director of Field Services and a member of the sales management team, Mr. Mike Donaldson. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Very good, Chris. This is one of our very first recordings in the month of April, so it's officially springtime in most of the Midwest.
Yes, getting outside and enjoying it. It's beautiful. I do love spring. It's a good time. Mike, who's with us and what are we talking about today?
Well, it was pointed out, Chris, that with the coming of warmer weather, uh, for all the good things that happen, two of the not such great things are the return of fly and worm issues. So today we have Agri-King beef nutritionist, Dr. Adrian Baker, to give us some background on those two issues and some possible ways to address them. Adrian, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
So, Adrian, it's one of those cliches you hear on farms that flies and worms can be silent profit robbers on livestock farms. Any rough estimates on what these two problems can cost a farm that doesn't address them?
I kind of getting ready for this. I took some time to look for a good hard number, and there's not really a lot out there. I've seen estimates um for the hornfly costing anywhere from 850 million to $1 million, or sorry, 850 to $1 billion for the U.S. cattle industry a year.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen globally their estimates of 21 billion from internal and external parasites. So quite a big number, but it's definitely uh, when you start seeing some of these studies, I've seen anything range from $200 a head a year to might be negligible, a few bucks.
Okay. Is it I'm sure it's maybe a little bigger problem as you go to the south of the country in the United States, just because they have warmer weather longer. But is there any place far enough north that you don't worry about these at all?
Not that I saw. Definitely the further south you have problems. I know, when I was in grad school talking with colleagues, friends that are in Brazil, they are constantly under challenge by this. When I did a short stint in Texas, it wouldn't be uncommon for, especially if you're a goat owner, um you might be treating your livestock 2 or 3 times a year easy, because
Wow.
you're in that part of the world. And so the further north, yes, it definitely does go away. But then, fortunately, you do have some more of that seasonality that comes in play, um, that really kind of help drive some of these parasites as well.
So let's talk about the worm aspect, deworming. Uh, what are some of the issues that worms are going to cause, and what do you see as the ways to address that? And I think one of the things coming, being completely transparent, I think a lot of people on the dairy side of the coin, because their animals aren't on pasture, have really drifted away from even considering deworming their animals. So maybe touch on not only both beef and dairy, but even purely confinement dairy.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the general thought is you're right with the pasture, that most time it comes into play. So, these worms essentially, are um dropped into pasture and feces, and then the larvae end up crawling up your pasture, up your leaves, and so they try to stay close to the ground because they don't like the heat. So um but they'll crawl up 2 or 3 inches, and so as cattle or livestock are grazing, they'll end up eating the grass, eating those worms again, and so then it just starting the life cycle and over again. So theoretically, you wouldn't run into that kind of life cycle on the confined feeding side, whether it's feedlots or dairies. But you know, I it you know the simple way around it is, it doesn't hurt to take a few samples, send them off for diagnostic testing, do fecal egg counts, and just verify where you're at with your load. I would say, any kind of beef operation, say you're a finisher or backgrounder, it would not be out of the realm of norm. Probably most of them are doing it now as we speak. When they're receiving cattle, they're gonna worm them. That's just part of it. That's an upon receipt procedure that has been done for years and probably will continue. But anytime, from a confined dairy standpoint, it probably wouldn't hurt to just, periodically check, do some fecal egg counts.
How long would a common worm live in an animal's intestine?
I mean, if you look at the way it is now, theoretically you're grazing pasture and those worms are out there up until frost, and then they essentially hunker down in the stomach all year till next spring. So they could stay in there, at least 5, 6 months.
Okay. So in some ways, just because you may not have feeders, you might not have milk cows out on pasture, what they were experiencing months ago could indicate whether you have a problem. Hence the recommendation to either, like you say, at least take a sample and in some cases just go ahead and worm them as part of receiving animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially on the beef side. You should probably be worming upon receipt. And most time, anytime you get, say you're buying some replacement heifers or something like that, and you don't know where they last treatment, it's just kind of a safe thing to just go ahead and worm them, in my
What
opinion.
what are the most common ways you see that being done nowadays? Worming an animal.
Well, pretty much you just really have three options. Your options are really, so there's three main um products or chemicals that are utilized, and so you can just kind of pick one of those. This kind of gets into vet stuff, and by kind it is into vet stuff, and so I always recommend working with your local producer, their or local veterinarian. They're obviously going to be aware of what challenges are occurring in that area, and what products are working best, especially when we look at um, resistance. There actually is a lot of pressure that we've been putting on these worms, and there's a good deal of resistance starting to pop up with some of
Really?
these. Oh yeah, some of these products. So it's definitely a concern. Most, I think when you start looking into literature, most are going to say you need to rotate through your main mode of actions every year, or if you're doing say two wormings a year, most will do dumping cows out on grass. Some will do also pulling cows off grass, and change around those mode actions and trying to make sure to knock down that resistance.
So, from a pasture management standpoint, are there any things that you can do not to the animal, but to your pasture to try and lessen the issue with worm?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, like those worms don't want to get out in the sun too much. They like to stay near the soil where it's cool. So, you look at different grazing techniques or well, pasture management, right? Making sure your pastures are staying tall to where those cattle aren't having to grub down towards the surface and be more exposed. Whether it has to do with rotational grazing, watching um stocking densities based on, kind of the year or how your rainfall's turning out. But yeah, from that standpoint, making sure to keep those cattle from having to graze super close to the ground will help take pressure off of them. Another way people are going about is looking at refugia. So, instead of treating all, say you have 100 cows, instead of treating all 100 cows, maybe you treat 20. And so then from that resistance standpoint, you're then going to be spreading out, a few of those resistant worms are going to survive, right? And those 80% treated cattle, but then that 20%, hopefully you've got enough out there that are diluting from that refugia standpoint that are going to dilute those resistant alleles and then try to keep essentially prolonging the resistance.
Okay. So, actually, am I hearing you correctly that although it is the promoted as one of the great ways to get the most out of your pasture. And we're going to rotate these animals, and we're going to put them out on grass that's only that tall. These things that give us better quality feed also make us more susceptible to warming troubles.
Well, I don't know if grazing down close gives you a super better quality feed. I mean, at some point, you're long term going to hurt your pasture, and then you're going to see. I would expect to see lesser tonnage produced from those pastures in the future. I mean, we've all seen
Oh,
those
okay.
grub down pastures, right? They just don't really come back every year as well. So if you let them go into winter and go in dormancy with a little bit of coverage on them, I think they come out of it better.
Is there any, so suppose uh, I brought animals off pasture and put them into confinement, dairy or beef, makes no difference. By not being on pasture anymore, by not having a host plant, the worms are going to die off on that confinement manure compared to what they could do in a pasture.
No, no, you'd still have some. Well, theoretically, yeah, they would die off in that standpoint, but you'd still want to go ahead and treat those animals because you will still have some hang around inside it. Uh,
Well,
you know,
I was
and
thinking it would break the cycle of the next animal to be infected from the infected animal's manure. That would
yeah,
get broken.
yeah,
Okay.
theoretically, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Switching over to flies, uh, and I guess worms would be a truly silent problem. Flies are anything but silent and a lot more day to day annoying. What is what's the current state of the world on flies? Doing so much dairy work myself, the tongue-in-cheek statement about fly control is, well, if flies are a problem, you don't have enough fans, because by the time you get by the time you get the airflow over dairy cows where you want to make them comfortable, the flies don't have a chance. They can't fly against that kind of an air current. Sounds kind of like, I don't know, cowboy science, but I've seen that actually work in some ways.
Yeah, I think there's good arguments to that too. I mean, part of me says when you also have those huge airflows, how much of that high moisture environment's going away that those flies really like, just because you're likely, if you're hot, you're pushing dry air across it, drying things out. Um, but on the beef side, there's obviously old school fly tags. Probably everybody's seen or put in fly tags at some point. Um, probably most people have seen, the rubs that get put around mineral feeders. Probably, you don't see them as much anymore, but that was definitely a thing. I know when I was growing up. Probably, Mike, did you see that before at all?
Oh
Or
yeah, yep. The Oilers, and yeah,
yep.
the rope, big thick rope hanging down for them to brush at.
Yep. But then, then there's a few feed through products, that you can put into the feed, uh, and that really help to stabilize or cause issues with the larvae inside the manure, to kind of stop that fly growth.
Hmm.
Uh, and then what I'm kind of getting to like a little bit, there's not a lot of research around it, but it's definitely intriguing. You're starting to see more people put garlic into their mineral. The thought is that the garlic, they're able to eat this garlic. They start kind of excreting these sulfuric compounds from the garlic from their skin. Yeah, so I kind of think of it as we're maybe like pre-brining the meat. Um,
Well, I was, yeah, I was, I was going to have a dietary specialization coming in as far as
yeah,
where this beef or milk could wind up, but yeah.
yeah. I'm working on some rosemary stuff too. Just
Yeah.
kind of getting it pan ready. No, I'm
Well,
teasing.
if you really want to impress my wife, we're gonna have to go to the however many ounces of Sweet Baby Ray's we have to put on
Oh.
TMR to pre-barbecue that meat. So,
Well, so yeah, so the garlic's kind of a neat deal. Yeah, it's supposed to kind of keep flies off. It doesn't really uh, kill the flies or anything, but just it's supposed to kind of give you presents. So I kind of equate it to, putting the all mosquito spray on yourself. It doesn't
For
really
sure. Yeah.
it just kind of keeps them away. Um, so yeah, there's a couple ways to get around it, but honestly, big ones for me is keeping things areas clean. If you've got back of a pen holding water, get it to drain, get it filled, and a lot of people don't really take into account weeds. When you start looking around some of these pens, you'll see like 4 or 5 foot tall pigweeds. Well, they're probably different weeds. I call everything like that pigweeds. But like those flies will actually hang out on the and so on those weeds, and you're providing harborage for them, right? So areas where they can go get comfortable, get rid of that stuff. Keep it cleaned up. Um, keep your keep your pens dry, and that'll really do as much as anything to keep flies off.
Is and I guess that goes, even on the dairy side, we were talking about fans, but now you've got lagoons, and if you wind up having crusts, I mean, on some level, just because they're not on your cows doesn't mean they're not on your farm. And that would probably even be a good. I know Agri-King's Pit King product can be outstanding in a lagoon situation at keeping a crust from forming. Not as big a factor on the beef side if it's a feed lot, a dry lot, but still a factor at some point. When you talked about people that are going to feed a product, and I'll follow your lead, that's between you and your vet, or the we're not going to endorse products here or speak some up and speak some down. Is there any need to rotate through those the way you talked about changing your dewormer periodically?
I haven't seen any research. I've anecdotally you'll hear some people say, "Oh, this doesn't work as well as it used to." Some of that's really tough because say you're feeding an in-feed product that disrupts the larvae cycle in the manure. The problem is you're feeding it, but maybe Chris lives across the street from you and he's not feeding it, right? Flies do fly. That's why we call them flies.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's times you'll hear, well, I don't think this certain way of holding flies back is working like it used to. And we always struggle every it's, well, last year it was this year, well, last year was hotter or wetter, this year was hotter or wetter, right? So it's always tough to kind of draw these comparisons year to year, but then you really got to take into account what your neighbors are doing. Because they flies will fly.
Any idea what the distance? Okay, so you Chris is across the road from you, but he's 3 miles away. Is that probably outside commuting difference, or is they go that far and farther?
I would think that would be outside commuting distance for
Okay.
a good chunk of them. You know, I'd be lying if I told you I'm super well read on this, but I would guess probably a half a mile. But here's the kicker: is okay. Maybe your dairy's there, 3 miles away, um, from you, but both you guys are kind of dumping some heifers out on pasture to raise them, and they're kind of in between you.
Yeah.
Are they hopping, skipping over to you?
Well, it sounds like one of the things that is good news, especially for the people who do it, and bad news for the people who just want to buy a solution and put in their feed, is just good farmstead maintenance and upkeep is going to be a big factor here. Like you said, eliminate the wet areas, places you've got vegetation. I mean, piles of moldy feed. There's any number of places that flies are going to find it's desirable to breed in. And if you keep things mowed and trimmed and picked up, it'll go a long ways towards not having troubles. That's basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to discount the and feed things because there's a lot of research that kind of around them. But one of the big tricks to them is you got to get consistent intake of it, right? Especially if you're out in pasture doing free choice mineral. If you're calculating, okay, I'm gonna eat these cattle are eating 4 ounces, and that'll give them so many milligrams per pound of body weight of an insecticide or a larvicide. Um, they need to be eating 4 ounces. If they only eat an ounce, then we're not really getting good treatment on them.
What is the if the goal is 4 ounces a day, can I have a couple light days and then a normal day? Or are the light days just going to give me such poor results that, like you say, if you're not going to get into them consistently, it's not going to do you any good at all?
No, I wouldn't say that. Some's better than none. But no, I mean, so if they're laying eggs in those um patties out there, so there's obviously patties that don't have uh that aren't going to have a product in there, or a larvicide in there. So you're leaving yourself susceptible. Um, so yeah, I think driving consistent intake is important. Um, but it, it would be ideal to have it every day.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
So, I mean, the most of the people I would imagine are going to listen to this are either in the Midwest or live in a place that has winter
Yeah.
and, the kind of cold weather where we don't worry about flies, regardless of where an animal's spending their time. When is the right time if you're going to feed something, when is the right time to start ahead of clearly defined fly season?
I would say probably about now, honestly. Kind of, it depends on the time of year. I think you want to get in front of it, at least a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before you really start getting into this warm weather. Um, I think that's what'll really kick them on. But you need to get good, make sure you got good consumption of whatever you're using, or got your treatments out there, and so that way you can really get a handle on them before they get really established. It's pretty easy to go after a few flies versus a bunch of flies.
Any other does I mean, I know, I guess the classic example, what I was going to ask, I know pink eye is often related to fly issues in cattle. Any other diseases being spread, and other than just looking miserable and being tough to treat, uh, it'd be enough to control flies just not to have any pink eye issues, I would think.
Yeah, I think there's I mean, again, we're getting into some of the stuff beyond me a bit, but yeah, there's definitely other things out there. I think when you get into any kind of these, especially if they're biting flies, or they're doing anything like sucking any blood or anything like that, I think there's potential to transmit any kind of, essentially at that point, bloodborne disease.
Any final thoughts wrapping this topic up? I appreciate you walking that fine line between not even playing a vet on television, letting them, and I'm not trying to draw you out that all of a sudden make statements that a veterinarian is going to call and complain about. But in summary, what would you have your message about? It's springtime, it's deworming, it's fly. What would you tell people?
Well, I would say, I guess, yeah, I mean, without getting into vet stuff, which the reason why, as a nutrition company or nutritionist myself, I worry about some of these things, especially worms and things, is they do rob nutrients of what we're feeding. So when we look at, let's uh let's beef cows, right? Our number one priority is repro. We're very concerned about reproduction. And so it's important to make sure we're putting things like, say, vitamin A into these cattle to help from the repro side. And if we're not doing a good job on the internal parasite side, and someone's like, well, what is there any things we can do better? And it's like, I'm putting quite a bit of A in there. I don't understand what's going on. It's important that we recognize we all have to work together to the same goal, right? And
Hmm.
part of that might be, maybe we got a parasite problem, internal parasite problem, and that's, you need to reach out to the local vet and do some fecal testing, um, you, periodically, just to make sure we're keeping things clean. And then when we're formulating diets, what we're formulating is actually getting into those animals.
Okay. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for
Yep.
joining us. It is nice not to have to shovel snow, but that doesn't mean we lose all responsibility to take care of some of these other seasonal issues. Chris, what did you learn today?
My big takeaway is flies can be like leaves on a tree in the fall. You have to rake up all yours. But if your neighbor doesn't rake his, you're still going to get more leaves. So take care of those flies.
Wow.
If you liked
Profound.
what...
That's
good.
really good, Chris. You might be next year we do one of these. We may make you do the whole topic.
All right, sweet. I'll do some research now. If you like what you heard, hit us up on any of our socials, or you can find us also a podcast at Agri-King on our website now. And if you have any questions or follow-ups, you can email us at podcast@agriking.com. All right, Dr. Adrian, Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.